Alright, welcome back. In the last video, we created the player's details page that allows us to get the details of the player. So when we hit the details, we get the details of the player. In this video, we want to add the page that would allow us to edit the detail of the player. So when I hit this edit button, I'm going to get the form with all this detail populated in the form, and then we can save it to the database. Let's get started with that. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code right here, and this is where we have the button, and we want this link to go to our edit page. So let's quickly create a component for that edit page. Let me bring back the terminal. So I'm going to bring back the terminal window, and we want to generate a new component. So let's call the component edit player. So G for generate, C for component. We're putting that in our components folder, and we want to call it edit player. Alright, and we don't want any test, so I'm going to do skip test. Okay, I'm going to hit enter, and our components is generated. The next thing I want to do is to add this to our route so we can get to that component. So I'm going to head over to my app.routing module.ts, and we have one for the player, and now we need another part to edit the player. So for the part, I'm going to say, since the part is starting off from player slash id, I'm going to make this one player slash edit slash the id, because we also need the id of the player to be able to edit the player. And the component for this is edit player component. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and now let's head back over here, and we want to go back to the player details component.html here, and now we can do the router link and set this equal to our link, which is slash player slash edit slash the id, which would be player the id. Okay, let's quickly try this out, see if it works. So if I hit on this edit page, you see I get player slash edit slash the id here, and I get edit player works. Okay, looks good. So on this edit player works component, we want to add a new form. So let's do that quickly. Let's head over back to Visual Studio Code, and we want to go over to edit player. So I do Control P, edit player .html, and here we want to add our form. So let's add our form, no action. And what do we need for our form? We need a form group as usual. So form group, and in the form group we want a label. So let's say label for the first name. So that's the data for the first name, and the title of our label, let's call it first name. Okay, and then we also need an input field. So I'm going to do input. The type of this input field is text, and I need a class of form control. Right, still form control. And for the name, I'm going to say first name And for the ID also, I'm going to say first name. Okay. Yep, that's more like it. Let me save that. And let's head over to the browser. Yeah, this is what we get. Okay, that's good. Let's do the same thing for the last name. So for the last name, I'm just going to copy this and paste it back here. And here, instead of first, I'm going to change it to last name and save that. Still looking good. As you can see here, the fields are really close to each other, and that's because the form group class is no longer used in Bootstrap 5. So if we head over to the Bootstrap website, let's just go to Bootstrap 5 here, and if you want to search for forms, we search for forms, and here you can see they are not using form group anymore. Instead they are using MB3. So this is one thing that has changed from Bootstrap 4 in Bootstrap 4 to what has changed from Bootstrap 4 to 5. So I'm just going to copy that and go back to Visual Studio Code, and I want to replace form group with MB3. I'm going to do Command D. Oops. Let's do Shift Code, and I'm going to paste that MB3 there. If I save it this time and I head back to the browser, play as app, okay. Now you get nice spacing between the first name and the last name. So I'm going to head back to the browser here to Visual Studio Code, and let's make this last name capital. Alright, we need one for the age as well. I'm going to copy this and paste it here, and instead of last name, I'm going to do Command D. Nope. 1 2 3, and let's make it age, and this is age. And one thing I also want to change is from text, I want this to be number. So that's age. The next one, I want country, so I'm going to paste this here, and instead of last name, Command D, I'm going to change that to country. And for last name, I'm going to change it again to country. We'll save that and let's check it out. So good, we have name, first name, last name, age, and then country. And notice if I click the first name, the text box get highlighted. So same thing, if I click the label, the text box get highlighted. That's because of the for attribute of the label. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to add the select drop down to select the position. So first name, last name, age, country, and the last one is position. So head over back here and let's look for the select. So I have one here with disabled input, so this one, so I'm going to copy this one here, and I'm going to head over to Visual Studio Code, and here I'm going to paste it here. So it's called disable select, but I'm going to nope. So I'm going to use Command D and change it to position. Okay, form label, and this for the label, let's say position. And for the option values, let's use dummy values right now, text values, and later we can get them back from our database. So option, we have forward or striker, and option we can have midfielder, and we can have option we can have defender, and finally we can have option goal. Actually, we don't really need this option value here because we're doing the edit, but anyway, you have it here. We have forward, and we have this here for the first name, last name, and the last thing, we need a button to submit it. So we have this button right here, so I'm just going to copy this button. It's just a bootstrap button with the type submit and the class primary, and here I'm going to paste that, and we have this submit button here. So if I save it and go back, I can close this right now, and this one too, and now it loads. Good. So the next thing we want to do is that from Firebase, when we hit on this detail, we want to populate all these values here on the form. So we need to call that get method to get all that value here and populate it on the form. So it's the same way we did it for the details page. So we've already seen that already. So I'll be fast with that. I'm going to head over to the details page and Command P, players detail that component. No, actually it's edit player dot component dot ts. So we have this here, and let's copy what we have here. We need to get the ID, get the constructor, and the engine in it. So I'm just going to copy it over, and here I'm going to paste it here, and then import what we need: the player surveys and the activated route from Angular router, and the model also. Okay, and I think we have one too many codes, or we're missing one. Yes, so this looks good. We have our engine in it, we're loading the data, and now we want to update all those values that we get from Firebase to our form. So how do we do that? We need to add the ng model directive, but before we do that, we need to import our forms module. So if I go back to app.module.ts, and here we are importing all of this, but we need a new import for the forms module. So forms module, good. I'm going to save that, and we go back to edit component, so HTML. Now we have this form, and we have name, first name. Now we can use the ng model, ng model directive, to bind that data that we get from the player to the first name. So there, I'm going to save that, and I'm going to copy this, paste it for the other values here, and this would be player.position. This is player.country, and this is player.age, and this is player.last name. Alright, so I'm going to save this and we go back to the browser, and if we check, we go to players app, let's check John Terry, and if I go to edit, everything works except the position. Alright, so we have all the values for the other fields except the position. We have first name, last name, age, country, but for the position we don't see the value. So if I inspect and go to the console, you're going to see that we have an error here, and the error is because we haven't given a name property for the position. Now when you use ng model, you need a name property for the field. So you need a name and then you need ng model. If you don't want to do that, you can use ng model options and set standalone to be true. So then you can use just the ng model without the name. So we are getting this error because we haven't added the name property to our position. Okay, so I'm going to head over back to Visual Studio Code, and for the position I'm going to put a name. So name is equal to position. Alright, I'm going to save that, and if I go back, you see that now we have no errors. I'm going to close this, but you see that the position is still not showing. When I click on this, I see the other values, but I want the default value to be the position of this player. So to do that, let's head over back to Visual Studio Code, and here we have the different value, but we want the default one that comes with it to be the one that came from the model. So for the value here, I'm going to do string interpolation and then player dot position, right? And I can do the same thing for the value here. This is what we'll see, and the value is what it sent when that select option is selected. So if we head over to the browser, you see now that Paulo Ferrara is a defender. Let's go back to the app. Let's try Ashley Cole. You see Ashley Cole is a defender. If I hit on edit, you see that he's a defender, and I can switch it here. And we're going to work on these other ones and make it dynamic when it's coming from the database. Alright, so this looks good. The next thing we want to do is when we hit on this submit button, we want it to be updated in the database. So we need to create a method for that in our service. So let's head over back to the player service. So command P, player service.ts. We have one method for get all the player, get a single player. Now we need one to update the player, so I'm going to call that update, and that is going to take the player object we want to update and the ID of the player. So player ID, that's a string, and then the player object itself, which is player. Takes these two parameters, and then we can use our db object, this.db dot, we should have update method, db object we need object here, and the type is player, the capital P, and then we want to use the URL like so to access a single player like we did for the get, and this time we are calling it player ID and not just ID. So player ID, but with a small p, and then we can access the update method here. So we use the update method to update the player. So I'm going to pass the player here, and that's it. This method doesn't return anything, so we can say it's void, doesn't return anything. It should get the object and updates it. Okay, so let's call this method in our edit player component.ts. And first let's go to the edit player.html right here, and let's get all the values that we enter here. How do we get the values? Oops, we can get the values using a template variable from here. That's just one way. There are other ways of doing it, but I like doing it with the template variable, so I don't want to go there again. Come on. Okay, so I'm going to come here and let's create the template variable. Let's call it f, and we're going to set it to ng form, so that will get all the values from the form. And then we need a method when we submit the form, and to handle that we use the ng submit. And let's create a method for update player. Let's call it update player, and then we can pass in that template variable there called f. So we have it underlined red because we haven't created that method. So let's head over to edit component.ts. So edit player component.ts here, and let's create that method here. Let's take f, which is of type ng form here, and then for now we can just console.log what we get back. So console.log f.value. Okay, so I'm going to save that. I head over to my browser, and if I actually go from a defender to a midfielder, I don't have any value there. So a goalkeeper, and then I hit submit. Let's inspect the console, and then you see we get the object of age, England, first name, last name, but we don't get any value for the position because we didn't add that. Let's just quickly fix that. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and let's go to edit player component.html, and here we have a player position for the value. It's empty, so here we want to put the values here. So I'm just going to simply copy and paste them. It's easier that way. For the midfielder, I'll do that. For the defender, and I'll do that for the goalkeeper. I don't have any value for the forward. Right now we are typing this by hand, but then later we want to get this from the database and we can simply have this all on one line. Okay, but for now let's just do it this way. So I'm going to save that now, and if we go back, Ashley Cole is a defender. We want to change it to a forward, and then if I hit on submit and check the console, Ashley Cole is a forward now. Okay, now let's save that to the database by calling the method that we created from the service. So let's go back to player.service.ts. We have this method created already. We want to use that in our component. So we have the service here, we have the update player here. So let's call that method. Instead of logging it, we just say this.player service dot update, and then we want to pass the values f.value. And also we need the ID, and remember we have the ID saved in a variable called ID. So this.id, and remember this is a string or null value, so we can either go back to change it or we can get the value as a string. So I'm just going to do this, set the variable here called ID, and then set it equal to this.id. Oops. Now we can do JavaScript and TypeScript, right? So ID is a string. Set it to be a string. Let ID equal to this.id as string. And here we're going to pass that value there and update. And after we've updated that, we want to redirect to the page that has all the players so that we can see it there. So I'm going to add a router that will take us back to the index of the page. So router, good, and here we can do this dot router dot the method that we can use to navigate. We can use navigate, and then this will take us back to the root of the page after it has been updated. Alright, that's our update method there. Let's just quickly go back, close the console, and here Ashley Cole is a defender, but let's just change his age to 50, and then when I hit submit, we see that Ashley Cole is 50, so it's working. Let's try Frank Lampard is 40. Let's edit his age and let's make it 44. If I hit submit, you see that Frank Lampard is 44. So works well. Now we can make Frank Lampard a striker if we want. Forward and submit. Frank Lampard is now a forward. The only difference is that here it's a forward with a small f, so I'm just going to change it back to midfielder. Okay, good. So the edit functionality is working. The next thing we want to do is to set up the add functionality here. So we hit on this add player and then we can add a new player. Let's do that next. See you in the next video.